What's up, everybody, and welcome to the UTS Accounting Weekly Show. My name is Dr. Amanda White.
I'm Dr. Nelson Ma. Happy Freedom Day.
I'm still in my house. I'm
You're
too scared to go anywhere.
Not much has changed on my end either. We're still
All these
in the
people that were getting up at 6 a.m. to go for haircuts and all that sort of thing, nothing has changed here.
Yeah, when are you booked in?
29th of October.
Okay,
For my haircut or for, doing my roots. But I'm one of these people in January, I book my hair appointments for the rest of the year. So shout out to the cutting room at Riverston where I go. They are fantastic. And yeah, I'm super organized. So I didn't need to rebook anything. I'm all good to go. And what about you? What are you going to be doing with your newfound freedoms? Anything special today?
Well, I'm going to see my family this evening, which is really nice. Going out of that 5K limit, feel a bit sort of living dangerously. And yeah, I'm getting my haircut tomorrow. So I'm very
nice. Did you have to make an appointment or is this one of those walk-in places?
No, I've made an appointment. So luckily I got in sort of early. So tomorrow.
So what sort of stories have we got this week?
Okay, so in terms of stories this week, our first story, A2 Milk is being sued. So A2 Milk is being sued by Slater & Gordon on behalf of A2 shareholders, which otherwise is referred to as a class action. A bunch of shareholders get together to sue a company. And it's over claims that they didn't adequately disclose the impact of the drop in revenue and profit on their financial statements, or in the disclosures leading up to the financial statements. So in terms of a bit of background, A2 Milk is hugely popular with personal shoppers that buy their baby formula products. We've seen them in Coles and Woolworths, and bring it back to China. However, with COVID, sales did collapse. So now they're accused of breaching continuous disclosure rules. So Amanda, what are continuous disclosure rules?
So all companies that are listed on the ASX are required to disclose information that has a material impact on the share price. So material, I guess, is it's hard to say that certain types of information, but if you think the information or the entity thinks the information is going to affect how the company is valued, it should be disclosed. Yep. And in this case, shareholders allege that the company knew about the accounting impact but didn't disclose it. And the view is that management would have had access to accounting information in the system, noticing the drop of sales before it became information in the financial statements. So, most companies will have regular monthly or quarterly reporting on sales. Yeah. And I would expect that most businesses during COVID, especially at the start, would have been watching these figures even more closely because they want to make sure that they stay a going concern, that they stay trading, and that they don't become insolvent. And, a lot of people, especially in Asia, like the idea of A2 milk. Being Asian, we have a greater propensity for lactose intolerance. And one of those things was that, A2 milk, it's less, you're more likely to be able to drink it if you're lactose intolerant. Yeah. I've never found any difference to me personally. But yeah, for some people, they say it works. So it's an interesting instance because a case like this also creates a potential contingent liability. Contingent liabilities are liabilities that might come about in case if some future activity arises. And so in this case, if they lose the lawsuit, there could be funds to pay out to shareholders.
Okay, that's very interesting. And I guess this points to the fact that financial accounting information isn't very timely. So as shareholders, they rely a lot on other disclosures, basically guidance about what they think revenues and profits will be. So speaking of profits, so the drop in profits didn't just relate to sales of that declines from lack of Chinese customers.
No, so there's a couple of different things coming about here. So the first part is, yes, sales are declining, but they make a food product, a fresh food product. So there's also the potential that the dried powdered milk and the baby formula, etc., did need to be written off. So anything they can't sell that is going to expire, you have to just say, look, that inventory is now worth nothing. And that ends up being an expense on your profit and loss statement as well. So we do have to write down inventory. There are rules that say it has to be the lower of cost or net realizable value. And the thing is here, certainly we've all seen at the end of the day at Woolies or Coles, there are certain times when meat that's close to expiring, milk, eggs, etc. When they get close to their expiry date, they go on special.
Yep.
But if you have, especially dried powdered milk, it does have a slightly longer shelf life. But with this premium product, you have to be able to sell it to a wholesaler, a retailer with sufficient use by date that, you can't say, oh, look, it's going to expire in 2 weeks. Can you sell it? It might not move through their supply chain. And we've talked about in the past, supply chains all around the world are really sort of, I guess, delayed and slowed. And so that, when you have decreased demand, it takes time for supply chains to adjust all of their mechanisms. And you can't just really expect the cows to have less milk. It becomes a really complicated process. Which goes back to how many cows do you have? How many calves do you end up, or how many female cows do you breed to get calves to, grow your market and the number of cows you have? It's such a complicated set of accounting around these types of assets.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably the worst situation when an inventory goes from being an asset to just being an expense without any economic benefit in terms of revenue. So it definitely makes financial statements look that much worse. And that's kind of the situation that happened with Kogan. They weren't able to shift their inventory because they bought so much of it. And that inventory backlog results in its stock price basically halving. But in terms of our second story, new lending rules will make mortgages harder to get.
The Australian property market is its own unusual bubble driven by negative gearing and Australians' obsession with property investment as a pathway to wealth.
Absolutely.
There's a whole lot of issues here. But what's going on with the bank? Or when I say the bank, I mean the Reserve Bank.
The Reserve, yes. Australia's bank regulator, APRA, has basically increased the requirement for mortgages, which now requires lenders to ensure that their borrowers can pay at least 3% more than the current interest rate on their mortgage. So basically, before,
and that's gone up, right? It used to be 2.5?
2.5%. And so this follows a steep jump in obviously house prices, prompting borrowers to take, bigger loans, and governments, considering the fact that interest rates might go up based on our discussion about New Zealand increasing the interest rates. So the question is, why target borrowers' ability to pay their interest rates?
Well, this is really important because we have to look at the solvency of people who are borrowing money, because obviously if you borrow money, then you can't afford to pay it back. Then it's not as simple as the bank repossesses your home and then resells it and then you're homeless. It's a long, drawn-out legal process to try and recoup monies lost. So what we want to try and do is make sure that people don't get into that situation. We want to minimize the number of personal bankruptcies that might come about because you can't afford to pay your mortgage on your home. So having these tests, and remember in previous weeks, I've always said, when I was looking to buy my first property, I made sure that I could handle 3, 4, or 5 interest rate rises. And now, there is specific government regulation that is increasing the buffer that you need to have, so that if the market does change quickly and the government does need to raise rates quickly to try and cool down the economy, you're not going to end up with this sort of roller coaster instance of raising interest rates to try and slow things down and then potentially plunging yourself into a recession if people, masses of people can't afford to pay, and that creates a real debt crisis. And we saw this with junk debt with the global financial crisis. In the US, it was a little bit different. You could just drop your keys to the bank and walk away if you couldn't pay. It's very different here. If you can't pay, the bank is going to chase you, and they're going to keep chasing you until you declare yourself bankrupt. And that's going to affect your ability to get credit in the future, your ability to, borrow other funds. There are all sorts of disclosures that you have to make if you've become bankrupt. So solvency, and this is really about the fiduciary duty of banks. Banks want to lend you lots of money so that they have you as a customer for a long time, but they need to do that in a responsible and ethical way, away from what we call predatory lending practices that encourage people to borrow lots of money without the ability correctly to pay it back.
Right. Okay. And so that's from a broader perspective. So in terms of anyone thinking of taking out a loan, for a home, what's the impact that they can expect?
So the impact is probably going to be that you're going to borrow less. So the amount and how much less depends on how much you want to borrow, of course. So the more that you want to borrow, that difference in 0.5% on that stress test is going to add up to more and more and more. That's going to be cut off what you could have borrowed 6 months ago to what you can borrow now. So you should always get professional advice. Remember that your banks and your mortgage brokers do have to be licensed. So make sure that you check with and get professional advice. Certainly, we've seen lots of advice channels on YouTube, on TikTok. They all have disclaimers that this is purely entertainment, etc. But you should always get proper financial advice when you're making a big decision like this, because not getting advice and just saying, yep, I'm going to tick and sign could get you into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So borrowing less might mean you might not be able to buy as much. You might have to travel further out. So we're seeing, huge growth on the outskirts of Sydney, lots of people commuting from the Central Coast and Wollongong on public transport, or you downsize and you think, maybe I don't need such a big property. Maybe I'll downsize to a smaller sort of apartment. We've seen lots of big renaissance in apartment living. And in Sydney, as well as lots of other places, without international students here, without migration, certainly there's probably more vacancy in that apartment area than in others. So, yeah.
Yeah. So
what are our tips for this week, given it's Freedom Week here in New South Wales?
Okay, so my tip is enjoy some freedoms. So I think, we've been at home for so long, just sort of trapped in, the same little space. And now you have much greater scope.
With the same people?
Yeah, the same people. Now you have much greater scope to go out a bit more, go to restaurants, see friends again, maybe even form study groups with people that you know from uni, and maybe you live in different suburbs. Now you can meet in a mutual place and hang out and just get a bit more of that sort of, enjoy a bit more of those freedoms and feel maybe a little less tense about being at home under all these lockdowns. So, and that will hopefully make you feel a bit better.
Not the best weather for Freedom Week. Right?
Not the best week.
It's raining here in Sydney. pretty heavily.
Yes.
But
how about you?
On the flip side of that, I guess the other thing to think about is that not everybody is going to want to go out, and there's also going to be some re-entry anxiety of like, how do I talk to people again? How do I make small talk with my friends? What is a reasonable distance to stand? When do I wear my mask? When do I take it off? Because you can now go outside, obviously, without a mask. We still have to wear our masks indoors. But if you have friends that are not keen to meet up just yet, just be mindful of the fact that people have some anxiety coming back into mingling with others. For me, it's pretty high because I have 2 children who are under 12 and they can't be vaccinated. So I'm not all that keen to go out and mingle with lots of people, not because I'm worried about catching COVID for myself, but if I give it to them because they can't be vaccinated, there's a lot more risk. So just be kind, figure out what's going to work best for you. If you're not ready to go out there and go to the gyms and restaurants and all the rest of it, figure out some way that maybe safely you can do that. I know that we've come into picnic season, not with the rain, but a picnic or doing something outdoors could be a great way to try and start to reconnect without potentially going into that higher risk situation of going into a restaurant where people might be in closer quarters. Or you might start with something short like coffee. Start with, takeaway coffee outdoors rather than let's go for a 4-hour sit-down meal.
Yeah, so definitely a sense that you need to be conscious of the rules and sort of draw the boundaries and know where other people draw their boundaries to ensure that everyone.
And communicate. Ask your mates and your friends and your family, what do you feel comfortable with? What are we going to do? I'm going to be sending out a poll to the 60 plus members in my immediate family to figure out what are our feelings about Christmas. Let's get some data before we make some decisions. But I hope everybody's out there is enjoying their freedoms. as best that they can. And yeah, have a great week. It is what are we up to? Week 10?
Let's count.
Week 10, which means there's only 2 more weeks to go in semester. It is prime assessment period as well now. So remember, of course, if you're getting stuck with assessments, reach out to your academics, reach out to the help service, reach out to the UTS library. Helps have lots of appointments available. And if they get inundated with requests, they can scale up the number of appointments that they can provide online as well. So if you need help, get in touch with UTS Helps. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you all next week.